The bull, with firm, determined steps, began its journey, carrying its fragile burden away from that place of abandonment towards the main road. With each stride, life seemed to return to the elderly woman, propelled by the strength and warmth of her unexpected guardian, and then, in the distance, the metallic gleam of her daughter's luxury car appeared. The villain, satisfied with her work, sped on, oblivious to the justice that was approaching. The bull, sensing the presence of evil, stopped. With a deep roar that made the earth tremble, he charged. There was no disembowelment, no explicit blood, only the fury of nature defending innocence. With a powerful, precise headbutt, the bull struck the side of the vehicle. The luxury car, a symbol of the daughter's greed, flipped spectacularly, becoming twisted metal and shattered glass. Justice, wild and relentless, had arrived. The bull's roar and the crash of twisted metal echoed through the valley, breaking the afternoon silence with the violence of thunder. The luxury car, once a symbol of power and impunity, now lay like a broken toy, dark smoke rising from its wreckage. The air, filled with the acrid smell of burning rubber, gasoline, and superheated metal, a macabre symphony marking the end of one era and the beginning of another. Upon the bull's broad back, the elderly woman, once on the brink of death, watched the scene with a mixture of shock and a strange, almost guilty satisfaction. Her body still ached, the snake venom still coursing through her veins. But the adrenaline and fury of that moment seemed to inject a new, dangerous vitality into her cells. Her eyes, previously clouded by pain, now shone with an unsettling clarity. She saw the car, unrecognizable, and imagined her daughter inside. Justice, she thought, had indeed arrived, but at what cost, and what would come next? The bull, her unlikely guardian, did not move. He remained there, imposing, his muscles tense, his eyes fixed on the smoldering wreckage. He seemed to wait, like a judge awaiting a final verdict. The silence that followed the rollover was heavy, broken only by the crackle of cooling metal and the incipient flames licking at the underside of the vehicle. Nature, in its silent fury, seemed to dictate the rhythm of that moment. Suddenly, a faint moan escaped from inside the car, a muffled sound, almost inaudible, but it made the elderly woman's heart clench. It was her daughter, alive. Nature's fury had been relentless, but not fatal, not yet. The elderly woman's breath hitched, a mixture of relief and dread. The villain was not dead, but trapped, injured. Fate, or the bull, had decided that the punishment would be slower, crueler. The bull, as if understanding the sound, snorted, hot vapor streaming from his nostrils. He took a step forward, then another, slowly approaching the overturned car. The elderly woman clung more tightly to his hide, feeling the tremor of the animal's muscles beneath her hands. She didn't know if the bull intended to finish what he had started or merely inspect his prey. Uncertainty hung in the air, as dense as the smoke. Through the shattered glass of the driver's window, now facing upwards, the elderly woman could make out a hand moving faintly. Pale skin, gold rings still gleaming, even amidst the destruction. It was her daughter, trapped, perhaps severely injured, but alive. A knot formed in the elderly woman's throat. The pain of betrayal was deep, but the maternal instinct, dormant for so long beneath layers of resentment, threatened to awaken. The line between victim and perpetrator, between mother and daughter, became painfully blurred. "No," she whispered, her voice hoarse, almost inaudible. Don't let her escape." But what did she mean by escape? Escape death? Escape punishment? The line between the two grew increasingly thin, and the elderly woman found herself caught in a moral dilemma that gnawed at her from within. The bull stopped a few feet from the car. He lowered his head, sniffing the air, as if he could sense the fear and pain emanating from the twisted metal. A dragging sound came from inside the vehicle, followed by another moan, this time stronger, laden with pain and frustration. The daughter was trying to free herself. The elderly woman felt a chill. If her daughter managed to get out, even injured, what would she do? Her mind, now clearer, reconstructed the events. The venom, the snake, the abandonment in the pasture, the greed. There was no room for pity, not now, not after everything. The mother's survival depended on the daughter's inability to act again. "Stay," the elderly woman murmured to the bull, her voice gaining a strength she didn't know she possessed. "Stay here. She can't see us." The bull, however, seemed to have his own agenda. He did not move towards the car for a final attack. Instead, he turned his head, his dark eyes meeting hers. There was an intelligence, an almost human understanding in his gaze. He knew the threat was contained, for now. With a slow, deliberate movement, the bull began to move away from the car, not towards the pasture, but to the side of the road, where the vegetation was denser. He was seeking cover, a place where the elderly woman could be safe, away from curious eyes that might appear with the noise of the accident. Animal wisdom surpassed human logic. The elderly woman clung on, her mind working feverishly. She needed help. She needed a doctor for the venom, but she also needed to ensure her daughter faced the consequences of her actions, and above all, she needed to survive. As the bull moved, the elderly woman looked back at the car. The smoke continued to rise, and her daughter's moan grew more persistent, now mixed with the sound of something scraping, perhaps her trying to break more glass or push some part of the car. The villain was fighting for her life, trapped in her own snare of luxury and greed. The bull hid among some tall bushes and trees, offering a clear view of the road and the overturned car, but keeping them concealed. The elderly woman dismounted with difficulty, feeling her body protest, but the urgency of the situation propelled her. She leaned against the bull's warm flank, observing. Time seemed to stretch and shrink. Minutes dragged like hours. Her daughter's moan subsided, replaced by an unsettling silence. Then, a new sound, the distant whistle of a truck. Someone was coming. Panic began to set in for the elderly woman. If someone found her there, with the bull and her daughter trapped in the car, how would she explain? And the venom? The story was unbelievable. She needed to act, and fast. But what to do? Reveal herself and risk being discredited, or remain hidden and leave her daughter's fate in the hands of strangers? And the wild justice the bull had initiated, her eyes fixed on the car. The smoke was diminishing, but the danger was not. Her daughter was there, perhaps unconscious, perhaps waiting for a chance. And the elderly woman, with the help of her bovine guardian, had a role to play. Vengeance or justice had not yet ended. The battle for her life and for the truth was just beginning. And the main road, once a symbol of salvation, now became a stage for the next act of a cruel drama. The distant truck whistle morphed into a deep roar, growing ever closer, vibrating through the ground and making the elderly woman's heart beat at a frantic pace. The headlights, once a dot on the horizon, now cut through the twilight gloom with an almost blinding intensity, revealing the dust rising from the dirt road. Panic, once a cold wave, was now a tsunami threatening to engulf her. But adrenaline, fueled by fury and venom, kept her strangely lucid, her senses sharpened. The truck, an old and robust model, braked with a metallic screech, stopping a few feet from the overturned car. The door opened with a creak, and a burly man, with a thick beard and a baseball cap, jumped out. In his hand, a flashlight cut through the air, dancing over the wreckage. His face, intermittently lit, was a mixture of shock and genuine concern. He didn't hesitate. He ran towards the twisted vehicle, his heavy footsteps echoing in the silence that followed the truck's engine being turned off. The elderly woman, clinging to the bull's warm flank, watched every movement, every expression of the man. Her body ached, the venom crawled through her veins, but her mind worked at maximum speed. What now? How would she explain the bull, the venom, her daughter trapped in the car? The story was unbelievable, worthy of a nightmare. No one would believe it. The man bent down, the flashlight beam penetrating the shattered glass of the driver's window. "Is anyone in there?" he shouted, his voice hoarse but laden with palpable concern. A heavy silence answered, broken only by the crackle of cooling metal. Then a faint moan, almost inaudible, escaped from inside the car. It was her, the daughter, alive. The elderly woman's heart clenched, a familiar pain, a maternal instinct struggling to emerge, but it was quickly stifled by the memory of the snake, the venom, the cruel abandonment. That faint voice was the same one that, hours earlier, had condemned her to death. The driver tried to open the door, but it was jammed. He called again, his voice more urgent now. "Miss, are you okay? Can you move?" A weak response, almost a whisper, floated on the air. "Help! Please!" The elderly woman felt a chill. That was the voice of manipulation, the prelude to a performance. The man, realizing the gravity of the situation, pulled out his cell phone. "I'll call emergency services," he muttered to himself, already dialing. "Bad accident here on the road. Overturned car. There's a young woman trapped." The elderly woman's mind reeled. If emergency services arrived, she would be found. Her daughter would be rescued. And then her daughter would tell her version of events. A version where the mother would be perhaps a crazy old woman, or worse, an aggressor. The venom still weakened her, made her vulnerable. She had no way to defend herself against a well-told story, a skillful lie. She looked at the bull. He remained motionless, a silent sentinel, his dark eyes fixed on the scene. He seemed to understand the gravity of the moment, the delicate balance between life and death, between justice and lies. The truck driver finished the call, explaining the exact location. The elderly woman knew she had a small window of opportunity. She needed to act. But how? Reveal herself now. She would be seen as a delusional figure, accompanied by a bull, with a bizarre story of venom and betrayal. Her daughter, even injured, was articulate, manipulative. She could easily invert the narrative. No, she couldn't risk it. Not yet. She needed a chance, a moment where she wasn't so vulnerable. The driver tried again to communicate with the daughter. "Help is coming, miss. Try not to move too much." From the car, a new sound emerged. A muffled sob, this time more convincing, more dramatic. Was it pain, fear, or the beginning of her act? The elderly woman knew her daughter too well. That was a performance. The driver, a good Samaritan, was visibly distressed. He walked around the car, assessing the damage, looking for a way to help. Oblivious to the hidden observers, the elderly woman's gaze lingered on her daughter's hand, still visible through the broken glass, the expensive rings gleaming. The symbol of her greed, now trapped in a cage of twisted metal, a perverse justice. The sound of a siren, faint at first, then growing, tore through the night air. Emergency services were on their way. Time was running out. The elderly woman knew she couldn't remain hidden forever, but she also couldn't reveal herself in that state. She needed a plan, and she needed to ensure her daughter didn't escape justice, not just the law, but the truth. She felt the residual effects of the venom, a dull ache spreading through her limbs, a slight dizziness, but the urgency of the moment, the fight for survival and vindication, was a stronger antidote than any medicine. She looked at the bull again. He was her only ally, her unexpected savior. Could he help her one more time? The siren was now very close, its wail echoing through the hills. Red and blue lights began to flash in the distance, painting the approaching darkness with a ghostly glow. The truck driver waved frantically, signaling their location. The elderly woman knew it was time. The moment of decision. She couldn't let her daughter control the narrative, but how to intervene without compromising her own safety, her own credibility? She thought of the snake, the calculating coldness in her daughter's eyes, the casual cruelty of her abandonment. No, there could be no pity now, only justice. But what kind of justice? The primal, violent justice of the bull, or the slow, methodical justice of man? And how could she, an old poisoned woman, ensure the latter? She gripped the bull's fur. He was warm, solid, an anchor in her storm of thoughts. He seemed to sense her turmoil, letting out a low, comforting moo. The emergency vehicles, an ambulance and a police cruiser, stopped behind the truck, lights flashing. Sirens fading to a low hum. Paramedics and police officers emerged, their movements swift and professional. The truck driver quickly explained the situation. "There's a young woman trapped inside. Looks like she's injured but alive." The paramedics rushed to the car, assessing the situation. One of them, a young woman with a serious face, peered into the wreckage. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" A louder sob this time, more convincing. "It hurts so much." The daughter was acting. The elderly woman's blood ran cold. She knew that sob. It was the sob of manipulation, designed to elicit sympathy, to deflect blame. The elderly woman needed to act. But how? She couldn't just walk out poisoned with a bull. They would think she was delirious. Then, a desperate and dangerous idea ignited in her mind. It involved the bull, her unlikely guardian. He had brought her this far. Could he help her make her presence known without revealing her compromised state? She whispered to the bull, her voice hoarse, but filled with new resolve. "We need attention, my friend, but not panic." The bull, as if understanding, shifted his weight. His large, dark eyes met hers. There was a glint in them, a shared understanding. The paramedics were now carefully, methodically, trying to extricate the daughter. The police officer was taking notes, questioning the truck driver. The scene was chaotic, but controlled. The elderly woman took a deep breath. This was her chance. She needed them to notice her presence, but in a way that wouldn't immediately label her as insane. She needed to be seen, but not fully exposed. "A little closer," she whispered to the bull, nodding towards the roadside, a slightly more visible spot, but still semi-hidden by the trees and bushes. The bull moved slowly and deliberately, his massive body pushing through the foliage. A glimpse of his dark coat, a glint of his horns, would be enough to attract attention, enough to make them question, enough to plant a seed of doubt, an insinuation that there was more to this accident than met the eye. One of the paramedics, turning to grab a tool from the rescue vehicle, froze. His eyes for an instant fixed on the dark, imposing mass moving at the forest's edge. A bull. It wasn't possible. He blinked, thinking the stress of the moment was making him see things. But the shape was there, unmistakable, and it seemed to observe. He said nothing, but doubt settled in his mind. Something was wrong. Something very, very strange. The paramedic, a young man named Lucas, blinked again. The sight of the bull, massive and dark against the twilight, seemed to have solidified. It wasn't a trick of the light or fatigue. The animal was there, observing. A shiver ran up Lucas's spine. A breeding bull in the middle of nowhere, a few feet from an overturned car accident. That was, to say the least, bizarre. He tried to push the image away, focused on the urgent task of rescuing the victim, but the seed of strangeness had already been planted. Inside the car, the daughter continued her masterful performance. Her sobs, previously controlled, were now louder, more desperate, mixed with groans of pain. "My leg! It's trapped. I can't feel my toes." The voice, though weak, carried a tone of urgency that would make anyone pity her. She knew exactly what words to use, what emotions to evoke. The elderly woman, observing from her semi-hidden position, felt a wave of nausea that had nothing to do with the venom. It was repulsion at the falsehood, at the cruelty disguised as fragility. The paramedics, oblivious to the complexity of the situation, acted with the efficiency of those who deal with tragedies daily. Extrication tools were prepared. The ambulance siren, now silent, still seemed to vibrate in the air. A police officer, notepad in hand, questioned the truck driver who gesticulated, visibly shaken. "She was there, trapped. The car just flipped. I just stopped to help." His story was simple, straightforward, and, for all intents and purposes, the only version of events available. The elderly woman felt time slip like sand through her fingers. Her daughter would be rescued, taken to a hospital, and there, with the help of lawyers and doctors, she would weave a web of lies that would exonerate her, perhaps even incriminate her mother. The image of the snake crawling on her skin returned with force, a vivid reminder of the betrayal. No, this could not happen. She squeezed the bull's flank again, the skin warm and pulsating beneath her hand. "Now, my friend," she whispered, her voice hoarse but firm, "we need a little more drama." The bull, as if understanding the gravity of the request, let out a low moo, almost a growl, and began to move. Not a sudden, panicked movement, but a slow, deliberate advance, like a shadow taking shape. Lucas, the paramedic, now had his head inside the car, trying to stabilize the daughter's neck. He heard a noise, a snap of branches, a rustle of leaves. He turned, and there he was, the bull. This time more visible, a few feet from the roadside, his dark eyes fixed on the scene, his head slightly lowered. He didn't seem aggressive, but his presence was undeniably imposing, almost supernatural. "Hey! Did you guys see that?" Lucas murmured, his voice a little louder than he intended. The police officer, who had his back turned, spun around, hand on his holster. The truck driver's eyes widened. "A bull? What's a bull doing here?" The daughter, hearing the commotion, stopped moaning for an instant. Her head, still trapped, turned slightly, her eyes half closed. She couldn't see the bull, but the change in atmosphere was palpable. What was happening? The elderly woman, mounted on the bull, felt a flicker of hope. Her strategy was working. They were noticing her, or at least they were noticing her guardian. But she still couldn't reveal herself completely. She needed something more, something to link the bull to her, and her to the truth. The bull, following the elderly woman's silent instructions, took another step forward, fully emerging from the shadow of the trees. His dark, almost black coat gleamed under the flashing lights of the emergency vehicles. He stopped, imposing, and then, with a slow, calculated movement, lowered his head and let out a deep bellow that echoed through the night, laden with a strange melancholy and power. It was not a sound of aggression, but of presence, of warning. The police officer, more accustomed to human logic than animal, hesitated. A bull. Here. That's very strange. He looked at the truck driver, who merely shrugged, as confused as he was. The elderly woman knew it was time. The bull had planted the doubt. Now she needed to present herself, but in a way that wouldn't make her seem like a delirious madwoman. She needed a link, with immense effort, ignoring the searing pain of the venom and the dizziness that assailed her. The elderly woman slid from the bull's flank. Her legs faltered, but she remained standing, leaning on the animal. She was visible now, a fragile, aged figure with disheveled hair and dirty clothes, standing beside a breeding bull in the middle of the road. Silence fell upon the scene. The paramedics froze, extrication tools forgotten for an instant. The police officer and the truck driver looked at her, eyes wide, incredulity etched on their faces. The daughter, inside the car, felt the abrupt change in the environment, the silence, the shock. She forced her head to see, and through the shattered glass, her eyes met her mother's figure, standing beside the bull, alive. An electric shock ran through her body, stronger than any physical pain. Her eyes widened in genuine terror, her victim facade crumbling for an instant. The elderly woman, her voice hoarse and weak, but laden with an authority that came from her pain and determination, spoke. She left me to die." The words, simple and direct, cut through the air. The venom still crawled in her veins. But the truth, finally spoken, was a powerful antidote. The police officer's eyes narrowed. The paramedics exchanged confused glances. The daughter, inside the car, let out a muffled scream, no longer of pain, but of panic. The narrative had shifted. The battle for truth was about to begin, and the elderly woman with her bovine guardian by her side was ready to fight. The silence that followed those words was heavier than the night air. It was not a silence of peace, but of shock, of disbelief. The paramedics, who moments before had moved with the urgency of those dealing with life and death, froze. Their tools, previously in hand, now seemed strange, purposeless objects. The police officer, hand still on his holster, looked from the daughter trapped in the wreckage to the mother, fragile and swaying, beside the imposing bull. His eyes, previously focused on the scene of a trivial accident, now held a mixture of confusion and suspicion. The daughter, inside the car, felt her world collapse. The muffled scream that escaped her lips was not of physical pain, but of the terror of being exposed. Her meticulously constructed, perfectly staged farce was being dismantled by a hoarse voice and an inconvenient truth. She tried to move, tried to scream, but the shock paralyzed her. Her mind, once agile and manipulative, now spun in panic. The elderly woman, in turn, felt a momentary relief, a surge of adrenaline that propelled her. But the venom was unforgiving. A sudden dizziness assailed her, and she clung to the bull's warm flank, seeking support. Her eyes, however, maintained an unwavering focus on the scene, on those observing her, and especially on her daughter's figure. The police officer, a middle-aged man with years of experience dealing with the unexpected, was the first to react. Slowly, he approached, his expression a mask of professional skepticism. "Ma'am," he began, his voice calm but firm, "are you injured? What happened here?" The elderly woman took a deep breath, the air seeming to scrape her throat. I was poisoned," she managed to say, the words scratching her throat. "By her, my daughter." She pointed a trembling finger at the car, at the shocked figure inside. One of the paramedics, Lucas, who had seen the bull earlier, stepped forward. "Poisoned? Ma'am, you need medical attention. You appear to be in shock." "I am not in shock," the elderly woman retorted, her voice gaining surprising strength, fueled by pure indignation. "I am telling the truth. She gave me snake venom, left me in the pasture to die. This bull, he saved me." The words fell like stones on the asphalt. A bull, snake venom, a murderous daughter. The story was so absurd, so melodramatic, that the first reaction was one of disbelief. The truck driver, who had been silently observing until then, cleared his throat. "With all due respect, ma'am, but that sounds like a delusion." Inside the car, the daughter, recovering from the initial shock, saw her chance. "Mother!" she cried, her voice still weak, but now tinged with false concern. "What are you saying? You're delirious. The accident. You must have hit your head." She forced a moan, trying to redirect attention to her supposed condition. "My leg. It hurts so much." The elderly woman felt a wave of anger. Her daughter's audacity, the coldness of her manipulation, even in such a situation. "I am not delirious," she insisted, taking a step forward, moving slightly away from the bull, as if to prove her sanity. But the movement was too much. Her vision darkened for an instant, and she swayed. The bull, like an attentive guardian, moved instinctively, his massive body offering support. The police officer, seeing the elderly woman's fragility, intervened. "Ma'am, please sit down. We'll call another ambulance for you. We need to understand what's happening." He looked at Lucas, the paramedic, who nodded and began to move towards the emergency vehicle. "No!" the elderly woman exclaimed, her voice hoarse but desperate. "Don't take me. Not before the truth is told. She will lie. She always lies." The daughter, hearing her mother's plea, intensified her act. "Mother, please, you're scaring me. I just want help. I didn't do anything." Her sobs returned, more convincing than ever, mixed with groans of pain. The police officer was in a dilemma. On one side, a young woman, injured and trapped in the wreckage, crying for help. On the other, an elderly woman, visibly debilitated, with a bizarre story and a bull as a witness. Logic leaned towards the daughter, but there was something in the mother's determination, in the intensity of her eyes, that prevented him from dismissing the accusation completely. And the bull. The animal's presence was such an unusual element that it added an undeniable layer of strangeness to the scene. "Ma'am," the police officer said, trying to remain calm, "we need facts. Can you tell us where this happened? Where were you before the accident?" The elderly woman pointed to the darkness of the pasture beyond the road. "There, deep in the farm's pasture. She took me there, gave me the drink with the venom, said it was to calm me down. And then she left me." The words were a Herculean effort, each one draining her already scarce energy. Lucas, the paramedic, returned with a stretcher and a first aid kit. He approached the elderly woman cautiously, his eyes fixed on the bull, who remained motionless, a statue of strength and loyalty. "Ma'am, we need to check your vital signs. Let me see your pulse." The elderly woman hesitated for an instant, but weakness was overcoming her. She extended her arm, and Lucas, with professional movements, began to examine her. His face, previously skeptical, began to show a hint of concern. The elderly woman's pulse was weak and irregular, and her skin, though dirty, had a worrying pallor. "She has hypertension and tachycardia," Lucas murmured to the police officer, his voice low, "and her skin is cold and clammy. There are signs of poisoning, yes." Lucas's words were a shock. The police officer's skepticism wavered. Poisoning. The elderly woman's bizarre story gained a terrible weight. He looked at the car, at the daughter who now seemed to have stopped moaning, her eyes fixed on her mother with an expression of pure terror. "What are you saying, Lucas?" the police officer asked, his voice now more tense. "I'm saying her complaints are consistent with severe poisoning," Lucas replied, already preparing an oxygen mask. "We need to get her to the hospital immediately." The elderly woman, feeling the oxygen on her face, gathered her last strength. "Don't leave me alone with her at the hospital," she whispered, her eyes fixed on the police officer. She'll try again." The tension in the scene was almost palpable. The truth, once a seed of doubt, now began to sprout, ugly and dangerous. The police officer, with a new seriousness on his face, looked at the daughter, who was now silent, her facade crumbling, real panic taking over her face. The battle for truth was not just beginning, it had turned a dark corner, and the elderly woman, with her bovine guardian by her side, had just scored the first point. The silence that followed Lucas's words was not one of resignation, but of an electric shock that ran down the spines of everyone present. The phrase, "There are signs of poisoning, yes," echoed in the night air, dispelling the fog of skepticism and revealing a brutal truth. The police officer, whose face had previously displayed a mixture of confusion and professionalism, hardened. His eyes, once focused on an accident scene, now fixed on the daughter trapped in the wreckage, no longer with the concern of a rescuer, but with the cold assessment of an investigator. The facade had fallen. Inside the car, the daughter felt the ground collapse beneath her feet. The panic that had paralyzed her gave way to a wave of icy terror. Her attempts at manipulation, her staged moans, all fell apart before the medical confirmation. Her wide eyes met the police officers, and she knew, in that instant, that she was lost. The victim's mask shattered, revealing the cornered predator. The elderly woman, in turn, felt a momentary relief, a bitter victory that propelled her. The oxygen on her face was a balm, but the pain of the venom still crawled in her veins, a constant reminder of the betrayal. "Don't leave me alone with her at the hospital," she whispered again, her voice hoarse, but laden with desperate urgency. She'll try again." That plea, more than anything else, sealed the daughter's fate. The police officer nodded, his expression grim. The gravity of the situation was undeniable. He turned to Lucas, the paramedic. "Lucas, we need a police escort for the lady, and make sure she's taken to a different hospital, if possible, or has a constant guard officer." He picked up his radio, his voice now firm and authoritative. "Central, I need immediate backup on Highway 101, KLN 52. We have a possible attempted homicide, poisoning, and I request a second ambulance for the accident victim." The daughter, hearing the words attempted homicide, let out a sharp cry, no longer of physical pain, but of pure desperation. "No, that's a lie. She's crazy, delirious. I would never do that." Her words, once so convincing, now sounded hysterical, the melody of a desperate soul. She tried to struggle in the wreckage, but her trapped leg prevented her. Her eyes flashed with rage and fear, fixed on her mother, who, despite being fragile, seemed to have risen from the ashes. The police officer ignored the daughter's protests. His attention turned to the elderly woman. "Ma'am, you are safe now. We will take care of you." He looked at the bull, who remained motionless beside the elderly woman, a statue of loyalty and strength. The animal's presence was an enigma, a bizarre detail that in some way validated the mother's unbelievable story. It was as if nature itself had refused to allow injustice to prevail. Lucas and his team acted quickly, but with the caution of those dealing with a poisoning victim. They placed the elderly woman on the stretcher, covering her with a thermal blanket. The bull, for an instant, seemed to hesitate, his large dark eyes fixed on the woman he had saved. But when the stretcher began to move towards the ambulance, he did not follow, remaining there, a silent guardian in the middle of the road, watching his protected one depart. The truck driver, who had been a silent witness to the entire scene, finally found his voice. I saw the bull. He brought her. I don't know how, but he brought her." His words, uttered with a mixture of astonishment and reverence, added another layer of surrealism to the night, but also an unexpected testimony to the elderly woman's story. The daughter, watching her mother being taken away, the truth solidifying with every movement of the paramedics and every word of the police officer, felt a chill run down her spine that had nothing to do with the night breeze. Her meticulously planned life was falling apart before her eyes. The inheritance, the luxury, the freedom. Everything was slipping through her fingers, replaced by the specter of prison and disgrace. The siren of a second ambulance sounded in the distance, mixing with the approaching wail of police cruisers. The scene, once a mere traffic accident, had transformed into a stage for a much darker drama. The elderly woman, lying on the stretcher, with oxygen on her face, looked back at the figure of her daughter trapped in the wreckage, and a mixture of sadness and determination filled her eyes. Justice, though late and painful, was finally on its way, and the bull, the improbable hero of the night, remained there, a silent sentinel, guarding the truth he had helped reveal. The night was still young, but the darkness of betrayal was beginning to be dispelled by the relentless light of truth. The siren of the second ambulance tore through the night air, a sharp wail mixing with the distant howl of approaching cruisers. The scene, previously a stage of contained despair, exploded into an orchestra of urgency and controlled chaos. The police officer, now radio in hand, coordinated the arrival of the teams, his firm voice cutting through the daughter's hysteria. The young woman's victim mask had completely shattered, revealing a face contorted by terror and rage. "No, I didn't do anything. She's lying. It's all her invention." Her screams echoed, but now they were just the hollow sound of an unmasked farce. The daughter's voice, once melodious and manipulative, transformed into a shrill, desperate shriek as she struggled uselessly in the car's wreckage. Her trapped leg was a shackle, and the vehicle's luxury, once a symbol of her ambition, had become her prison. Lucas and his team, ignoring the daughter's protests, acted with the precision of those who know every second counts. The elderly woman, now on the stretcher, felt the warmth of the thermal blanket and the cool breeze of oxygen on her face. It was a sensation of relief, but also of overwhelming weakness. Her eyes, however, held the flame of determination. She cast one last look at her daughter, a complex mixture of maternal pain and the cold realization of the evil that dwelled in that heart. There was no more forgiveness, only a thirst for justice. The bull, the silent giant, remained there, a living statue of loyalty and primal strength. His dark eyes followed the stretcher as it was carefully pushed into the ambulance. For an instant, it seemed he would follow, but he stopped, as if knowing his mission was accomplished. He had delivered the truth. Now, justice would have to do its work. With a nod to the police officer, Lucas closed the ambulance doors. The siren, once an alert, was now a song of departure. The vehicle sped off, taking the elderly woman to the safety of a hospital and the promise of urgent medical care, and more importantly, away from her daughter's shadow. The police officer, fulfilling his promise, had already ensured that an officer would accompany the elderly woman full-time. As the ambulance drove away, the blue and red lights of several police cruisers and the second ambulance painted the night's darkness. Highway 101, once a desolate stretch, transformed into an operations center. More police officers disembarked, their flashlights cutting through the air, illuminating the twisted wreckage of the luxury car and the figure of the daughter trapped inside. Sergeant Mendez, a veteran with years of experience in crime scenes, took command. His eyes swept the scene, absorbing every detail: the destroyed car, the screaming daughter, paramedic Lucas still there, and the bull, a majestic anomaly in the midst of it all. "What do we have here, officer?" Mendez asked the first police officer, his voice grave and calm. The police officer quickly summarized the situation. The accident, the elderly woman brought by the bull, the poisoning accusation confirmed by Lucas, the daughter as the main suspect. The truck driver's testimony about the bull was crucial, adding a surreal yet undeniable weight to the elderly woman's narrative. Mendez approached the car, his expression impenetrable. The daughter, seeing the new figure of authority, tried again. "Sergeant, please, get me out of here. My mother is crazy. She made it all up. I'm the victim here." "Miss," Mendez said, his voice devoid of emotion, "your paramedics are on their way. They will tend to your injuries." He offered no comfort, only the cold statement of facts. His eyes, however, were not fixed on her, but on the wreckage, looking for something more, for any clue that could corroborate the mother's story. The second ambulance team arrived and began to assess the daughter. She moaned, but now her moans seemed more calculated, a desperate attempt to revive the farce. However, the confirmation of the mother's poisoning had changed the dynamic. No one saw her as an innocent victim anymore. Mendes gave orders to cordon off the area, call forensics, and begin a preliminary search of the pasture where the elderly woman claimed to have been abandoned. The bull, still impassive, was a mystery to be unraveled, but its presence was silent proof that something extraordinary had happened. The daughter, observing the commotion, felt despair deepen. The lights of the police cruisers, once a sign of rescue, now seemed like the headlights of an inquisition. Her life of luxury, her inheritance plans, everything was falling apart. The poison she had given her mother now seemed to poison her own existence, drop by drop, sealing her fate in a cold cell. The night, which should have been the stage of her triumph, became the setting for her downfall. The truth, brought by a bull, was more relentless than any poison. Highway 101, once dormant, now pulsed with the cold energy of investigation. The sirens ceased, replaced by the murmur of walkie-talkies and the grave voice of Sergeant Mendes, who orchestrated the scene with the precision of a somber maestro. The daughter, still trapped in the wreckage, watched the commotion with wide eyes, her breath coming in gasps between calculated moans and hysterical whispers. The second ambulance team finally managed to free her, a painful process that wrung genuine screams of pain from her, mixed with laments about her mother's supposed madness. As she was placed on a stretcher, the daughter tried once again to manipulate the narrative. "My leg. It's broken. I need a hospital. My mother. She's a cruel woman. She always hated me. This is all to incriminate me." Her words, however, fell on deaf ears. The paramedics worked in silence, their expressions impassive. Sergeant Mendes, with his imposing posture, approached the stretcher. His eyes, which had seen the worst of humanity, fixed on her with an intensity that made her tremble. "Miss," he began, his voice calm, "but laden with authority, you will be taken to the hospital. But first, I need you to know that your mother has made serious accusations, and we have witnesses. And a bull." The mention of the animal, spoken with an almost ironic seriousness, disarmed the daughter. She swallowed hard, panic growing in her chest. The bull, the damned bull, was the weakest link in her farce. The most absurd detail, and paradoxically, the most credible. Mendes gave a signal and 2 police officers approached the stretcher. "She will be accompanied, and as soon as the doctors release her, she will be taken to the police station to give a statement." The daughter tried to protest, but one of the officers interrupted her with a firm gesture. "Anything you say now can and will be used against you." The phrase, so common in movies, sounded like a death sentence in her ears. As the second ambulance departed, taking the daughter to an uncertain fate, the forensics team arrived. The strobe lights of the police cruisers danced over the dark pasture, revealing the trampled grass and disturbed earth where the elderly woman had been found. Mendes pointed to the area. "I want a complete sweep. Look for syringes, vials, any trace of venom, and call in the K9 unit, if necessary." The bull, oblivious to human complexity, remained a few feet from the accident scene, observing with his deep eyes. His presence was a constant reminder of the story's improbability, but also of its veracity. The truck driver, still there, trembling, was taken to give a formal statement. His story, however fantastic, was consistent and corroborated the elderly woman's version. Inside the first ambulance, the elderly woman felt the pain of the venom slowly subside, replaced by deep exhaustion. Paramedic Lucas monitored her vital signs, a worried expression on his face. "You are stable, but there's still a lot of venom in your system. We need to get to the hospital as quickly as possible." The police officer beside her remained vigilant, his eyes fixed on the road, but his hand on his holster. The urgency in the elderly woman's plea, "Don't leave me alone with her," resounded in his mind. Back on Highway 101, the search in the pasture began to yield results. One of the forensic experts, with a powerful flashlight, illuminated a small, bright spot in the grass. "Sergeant, we found something." Mendez approached quickly. It was an insulin syringe, empty, but with residues of a greenish liquid inside. A few centimeters away, a small, broken glass vial with an illegible label, but with the same greenish residue. The discovery was a fatal blow to the daughter. The syringe and the vial were irrefutable proof, the materialization of the evil she had tried to hide. Sergeant Mendez picked up his radio. "Central, I confirm the attempted homicide. We have the syringe and the venom vial. I request that the suspect be detained immediately after medical treatment and taken for questioning." The night, once an accomplice to darkness, now revealed its darkest secrets. The daughter, on her way to the hospital, felt an icy shiver run down her spine. The image of the syringe, which she had used with such coldness, now materialized in her mind like a ghost, a silent condemnation. The luxury, the inheritance, the life she so coveted. Everything was fading, replaced by the cold reality of bars and relentless justice. The bull, the improbable avenger, had fulfilled his role. The truth, like the venom, had been inoculated and now spread, irreversible. The siren of the first ambulance tore through the darkness of Highway 101, an urgent wail announcing the race against death. Inside, the elderly woman, wrapped in thermal blankets, felt every jolt of the road, every beat of her own heart, a weak but persistent rhythm. Lucas, the paramedic, kept his eyes fixed on the monitors, tension etched on his face. The police officer, a silent sentinel, watched the passing landscape, his presence a barrier against fear and loneliness. The elderly woman, despite overwhelming weakness, clung to consciousness, to the promise of justice the bull had brought. The image of the syringe and the vial, now in forensic hands, was irrefutable proof. The silent condemnation of her own flesh and blood. At the hospital, the emergency team was already waiting. The ambulance doors opened to a whirlwind of lights and voices. "Venom poisoning victim, unstable vital signs but conscious," Lucas announced, as the stretcher was quickly pushed inside. The elderly woman felt skilled hands working around her, the prick of needles, the smell of antiseptics. The antidote, liquid hope, began to be administered. The pain, once a burning flame, transformed into a distant tingling, a reminder of the battle her body was fighting. The police officer remained by her side, a rock in the medical storm, fulfilling the promise of protection. Her eyes, even closed, saw the image of the bull, the giant who bowed, the improbable guardian angel. A few minutes later, the second ambulance arrived, without the same clamor of urgency. The daughter, still moaning and protesting, was removed from the wreckage and taken to the same hospital. But the reception was cold, devoid of compassion. Two police officers awaited her at the entrance, their expressions impassive. Her broken leg was a painful reality, but her pleas and accusations against her mother fell on deaf ears. The farce had collapsed. Her eyes, once full of manipulation, now reflected growing panic. She was a prisoner of her own actions, shackled by the truth an animal had revealed. As she was led to a less prioritized emergency room, the daughter felt the weight of condemnation. The cold hospital lights seemed to expose every lie, every cruel calculation. The luxury, the inheritance, the power she so coveted, everything slipped away like sand through her fingers. The image of the syringe, which she had handled with such coldness, now materialized in her mind like a ghost, a silent condemnation. She tried to argue with the police officers accompanying her, but her words were cut short by a chilling silence. "You will have a chance to speak at the police station," one of them said, his voice monotonous, leaving no room for negotiation. Back on Highway 101, Sergeant Mendez orchestrated the scene with the precision of a somber maestro. Forensics worked under the strobe lights of the police cruisers, every movement meticulous, every fragment of evidence a link in the chain of justice. The syringe and the vial, carefully packaged, were the centerpiece of the puzzle. The pasture, once a scene of abandonment, was now a stage of revelations. The canine search team was called in, scouring every square inch for more clues, for anything that could strengthen the case. The bull, the improbable avenger, remained a few feet from the accident scene. His presence was a constant reminder of the story's improbability, but also of its undeniable veracity. An environmental patrol officer was called to assess the animal. There were no signs of aggression, only a majestic calm. It was decided that he would be taken back to the farm, but under observation, his role in the story recorded for posterity. The truck driver, after giving his formal statement, was released, still in shock, but relieved to have fulfilled his civic duty. At the hospital, the elderly woman felt a gradual improvement. The venom receded, exhaustion remained, but the flame of determination in her eyes flickered with greater strength. She had survived, she had been saved, and now justice would be done. The police officer beside her, seeing her more stable, signaled Lucas. "I'll let the sergeant know. She's out of immediate danger." The daughter on her stretcher with her leg immobilized felt the coldness of the mental handcuffs tightening around her. The perfect plan, the guaranteed inheritance, everything had turned into a nightmare. The sound of one of the police officers' walkie-talkies, announcing the confirmation of the poisoning and the order for detention, sealed her fate, the luxury, the life she so coveted. Everything was fading, replaced by the cold reality of bars and relentless justice. The night, which should have been the stage of her triumph, became the setting for her downfall. The truth, brought by a bull, was more relentless than any poison. Dawn advanced, but for the elderly woman, time seemed to have folded, stretched, and finally slowed down. In her hospital bed, under the cold, steady light, the fog of the venom began to dissipate. The antidote, a liquid blessing, coursed through her veins, expelling the death that had nestled in her body. The pain, once an orchestra of agony, was now a distant echo, a reminder of the battle her body had fought and won. Her eyes opened, fixing on the white ceiling, and a solitary tear ran down her temple, not from pain, but from a deep, almost overwhelming relief. She had survived, thanks to a bull. The police officer accompanying her, noticing her improvement, approached. His voice, previously just a murmur of reassurance, now brought the promise of a new chapter. "You're more stable. Sergeant Mendez is on his way. He wants to speak with you when you feel ready." The elderly woman nodded, her throat dry but her mind clear. The image of the syringe, the broken vial, the malice in her daughter's eyes, all solidified in her memory, not as a nightmare, but as a cruel truth that demanded reparation. She didn't want revenge, but justice. And above all, she wanted the truth to be known. Meanwhile, in a less privileged ward of the same hospital, the daughter lay on her stretcher, her leg immobilized and her mind in a whirlwind of despair. The cast on her leg was a physical weight, but the condemnation in her eyes was a much greater burden. The cold hospital lights, previously mere details, now seemed to amplify every lie she had told, every cruel calculation she had made, the perfect plan, the guaranteed inheritance, the luxurious future she so coveted. Everything was fading, replaced by the cold reality of bars and relentless justice. The two police officers guarding her maintained a respectful distance, but their presence was an invisible handcuff, tightening with each passing minute. She tried once again to rehearse a new version, a new manipulation, but the words died in her throat. There were no more credulous listeners. There was no more room for farces. The sound of one of the police officers' walkie-talkies, announcing the confirmation of the poisoning and the formal order for detention, sealed her fate. It was official. She was a criminal. Sergeant Mendez arrived at the hospital with the gravity of a judge. First, he went to meet the elderly woman. His eyes, which had witnessed so much pain and malice, softened upon seeing her more recovered. "Donna Elza," he began, his voice filled with respect, "you are a lucky woman and of impressive courage." He recounted the discovery of the syringe and the vial, the consistency of the truck driver's testimony, and how each piece of the puzzle fit together, revealing the truth. The elderly woman listened, each word confirming her own version of events, each detail a validation of her sanity and her terrible experience. She asked to see the bull, but Mendez explained that he was already being taken back to the farm, under the care of an environmental officer. His story, however, would be an integral part of the process. Next, Mendez proceeded to the ward where the daughter was. The atmosphere changed drastically. A heavy air of condemnation hung over the bed. He approached, his posture imposing, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her shrink. "Miss," he said, his voice calm but cutting like ice, "the evidence is irrefutable. The syringe and the vial were found. The venom has been identified. Your mother is recovering, and her testimony is consistent with all the evidence we have collected." The daughter tried to interrupt, babbling something about a conspiracy, about her mother's madness, but Mendez raised his hand, a gesture that silenced her immediately. "There is no conspiracy, only facts, and a bull who witnessed everything." The mention of the animal again struck her like lightning. The bull, the most absurd, most improbable, and most devastating link for her defense. How could she refute an animal? How could she deny such a singular, unexpected witness? Panic turned into despair. The tears, previously calculated, were now genuine, streaming down her face mixed with the cold sweat of fear. "As soon as the doctors release you, you will be formally arrested and taken to the police station for questioning," Mendez continued without emotion. "Your lawyer will be notified, but I advise you to be honest. The truth, miss, always finds a way." He signaled the police officers, who approached the stretcher, handcuffs dangling from their belts, a visual reminder of the future that awaited her. The daughter closed her eyes, her face contorted in a mask of horror. The luxury, the freedom, the life she had so coldly planned. Everything had turned to ashes. The night, which should have been the stage of her triumph, became the setting for her downfall. The truth, brought by a bull, was more relentless than any poison, and justice now was an unstoppable force. The chapter of the inheritance was closed, and a new, dark, and inevitable one was just beginning. Dawn advanced, and with it, the cold and relentless hand of justice began to tighten. In the less privileged ward of the hospital, the daughter lay, no longer a calculating villain, but a pathetic figure, cornered by her own cruelty. The sound of handcuffs, which Sergeant Mendez had signaled, echoed in her mind, even though they were not yet on her wrists. The cast on her leg was a mere physical discomfort compared to the crushing weight of the condemnation she felt. The cold hospital lights, previously mere details, now seemed to amplify every lie, every cruel calculation she had made. The perfect plan, the guaranteed inheritance, the luxurious future she so coveted. Everything was fading, replaced by the cold reality of bars and relentless justice. Meanwhile, in the intensive care ward, Donna Elza felt renewed strength but also a deep sadness. The physical pain receded, but the pain of betrayal remained, an open wound in her soul. She had survived, yes, but at what cost? Her own blood had tried to take her life. The police officer beside her, Lucas, noticed the change in her gaze. It was no longer the panic of a victim, but the resolve of a survivor. "Donna Elza, you are recovering very well," Lucas said, trying to offer some comfort. "Sergeant Mendez is already taking care of everything. Justice will be done." The elderly woman nodded, her voice still weak but firm. "I know, my son, I just wanted to understand. Why so much hatred? Why such a desire to see me dead?" Her eyes welled up, not with self-pity, but with a deep incomprehension. She didn't want revenge, but the truth, the explanation for the darkness that had consumed her daughter. Lucas had no answers for such complex questions. He just squeezed her hand, a silent gesture of support. The medical team made regular rounds, monitoring her vital signs, adjusting medication. The antidote was working wonderfully, and recovery, though slow, was steady. Hours later, with the sun already peeking over the horizon, a doctor approached the daughter's stretcher. "Miss, your tests are stable, your leg is immobilized, and there is no immediate risk. We can release you into police custody." Those words, police custody, echoed in the room like a final verdict. The two police officers approached, their expressions serious. One of them held a pair of handcuffs. "We need to formalize the arrest, miss. Please extend your hands." The daughter trembled. Tears streamed freely now, without makeup, without artifice. "No. Please, guys, I didn't do anything. My mother is crazy. It's a conspiracy." Her pleas were desperate, but empty. The cold handcuffs closed on her wrists, a metallic sound that sealed her fate. Due to her broken leg, she would be transported in a wheelchair, but the humiliation was palpable. As she was wheeled out of the emergency room, her gaze crossed with that of her mother, who was being transferred to a private room. For an instant, the hatred in the daughter's eyes mingled with a flicker of fear, and in the mother's eyes, a deep and resigned sadness. There were no words, only the heavy silence of an irremediably broken relationship. At the police station, the scene was one of cold, bureaucratic efficiency. The daughter, still in the wheelchair, was taken to the booking room. Her fingerprints were taken, her mugshots snapped. Each camera flash was a blow to her carefully constructed image, to her inflated ego. She was now just a number, a criminal. Her lawyer, a middle-aged man with deep circles under his eyes, arrived shortly after, his expression tired, already aware of the case's gravity. "Miss, the charges are serious," he whispered, as he accompanied her to an interrogation room. "Aggravated attempted murder, poisoning. And the fact that the bull is a witness is an unprecedented complication." He shook his head, already foreseeing the legal battle to come. The luxury, the inheritance, the power she so coveted, everything had vanished. The truth, brought by a bull, was more relentless than any poison, and justice now was an unstoppable force. The chapter of the inheritance was closed, and a new, dark and inevitable one was just beginning. The interrogation room was a cube of grey walls, lit by a cold, merciless light that revealed every line of fatigue, every trace of fear on the daughter's face. Sitting in the wheelchair, her leg in a cast stretched out in front of her, she looked like a broken puppet. The strings of manipulation finally cut. Her lawyer, Dr. Almeida, a man who had seen everything, but never a case with a bovine witness, watched her with a mixture of concern and resignation. Sergeant Mendez entered the room, accompanied by a police officer who discreetly positioned herself. Mendez's presence was imposing. His voice, when spoken, carried the weight of law and truth. "Miss," he began without preamble, "we are here for you to tell your version of events, but first I want to make it clear. We have irrefutable evidence. You have the right to remain silent, but anything you say can and will be used against you in court." The daughter, still in shock, tried to compose herself. She took a deep breath, seeking the mask of innocence that had so often saved her. I already said. My mother is senile. She made all this up. I would never harm her. I love her." The words sounded hollow, without the conviction she had hoped for. Dr. Almeida looked at her, a silent warning in his eyes. "Don't lie brazenly." Mendez merely nodded, unfazed. I understand, but the evidence tells a different story. The syringe and the snake venom vial, found at the exact spot where your mother was abandoned. The toxicology report, which confirms the presence of the venom in Donna Elsa's system. The truck driver's testimony, who saw you flee the pasture. And, of course, the bull. The mention of the animal, once again, struck her like an electric shock. The bull. That animal, which should have been just an insignificant detail in the landscape, had become the pivot of her ruin. The bull. What does the bull have to do with this? She stammered, her voice choked. The bull, miss, Mendez replied with a disturbing calm, not only carried her to the road, saving her life, but also in some way prevented your escape and damaged your vehicle. It is a crucial piece of the puzzle. A silent, yet powerful testimony to your cruelty and the attempted murder. Dr. Almeida intervened, his voice grave. Sergeant, my client is in shock and on medication. She needs time to process all of this. She will have all the time she needs, Dr. Almeida, Mendez retorted, his gaze fixed on the daughter. But the truth doesn't wait. What do you have to say about the venom? About leaving your mother to die in the pasture? The daughter felt cold sweat trickle down her back. The lies, once so easy, now unraveled in her mind. The perfect plan had turned into a nightmare. She tried a new tactic, victimhood. I was scared. My mother was out of her mind. She attacked me. I was just defending myself. The venom. I don't even know where it came from. Mendez smiled humorlessly. Defended yourself by abandoning her to die with a snake venom syringe? Do you expect us to believe that? He picked up a folder and opened it, revealing photos of the syringe, the vial, the overturned car. You planned this, didn't you? You wanted the inheritance. You wanted to get rid of your mother. The tears returned, this time, not calculated, but of pure despair. The image of luxury, of the carefree life she had dreamed of, faded with every word from Mendez. She saw the prison bars, the public trial, the shame. No, it's not true. I'm not a murderer, she whispered, her voice almost inaudible. The truth, miss, is that you are an ambitious and cruel woman, Mendez continued, his voice without a hint of emotion. And justice this time will not be blind. It will be guided by a mother's courage, a truck driver's shrewdness, and the unexpected intervention of a bull. Dr. Almeida realized the battle was lost, at least for now. His client was crumbling. Sergeant, I ask that you end the interrogation for today. My client is not in a condition to continue. Mendez nodded, closing the folder. Very well, Dr. Almeida, but know that we will return, and with each new piece of evidence, each new testimony, the truth will become clearer. You, he said, looking directly at the daughter, will have plenty of time to think about your choices, and about how an animal whom you despised became your most relentless accuser. The daughter closed her eyes, her face contorted in a mask of horror. The sound of handcuffs, which were not yet on her wrists, seemed to echo in her ears. The interrogation room, once a stage for her lies, transformed into a cell, and the future that awaited her was as bleak as the venom she had used. The inheritance, which she so coveted, was now just a bitter memory of her downfall. The bull, the improbable hero, had sealed her fate. The interrogation room door closed with a dull thud, echoing the emptiness that now settled in the daughter's soul. Sergeant Mendez had left, leaving her there, a pathetic figure in the wheelchair, her leg in a cast and her life in tatters. Dr. Almeida sat in front of her, his face tired, but his eyes fixed on her with a seriousness she had never seen before. "Miss," he began, his voice low, almost a whisper, "the situation is extremely serious. The sergeant is not bluffing, the evidence is compelling, and Donna Elsa's testimony combined with the truck drivers and, yes, the bull's intervention creates a scenario almost impossible to refute. She tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. Her mind, once so sharp and calculating, was now a whirlwind of fear and despair. The image of the bull, majestic and relentless, invaded her thoughts. That animal which she had despised as part of the rustic landscape that confined her had become the herald of her ruin. The irony was cruel, the punishment poetic. I don't know what to do," she managed to stammer, tears dry on her face, leaving salty trails. Her makeup, long since gone, revealed the pallor of her skin, the darkness under her eyes. The mask had completely fallen. "What to do now is cooperate within your rights," Dr. Almeida replied, his voice firm. "There's no room for more lies. We need to build a defense, however difficult it may be, and the first step is to accept reality." He paused, observing her. "You will be formally charged with aggravated attempted murder, premeditation, the use of poison, abandoning the victim in a remote location. All of this aggravates the situation." While the daughter drowned in her own misery, in another part of the city, Donna Elsa watched the sunrise from the window of her private hospital room. The physical pain diminished with each hour, replaced by an unsettling mental clarity. She had survived, yes, but the scar of betrayal was too deep to be healed by any antidote. Sergeant Mendez and Police Officer Lucas were by her side, their presences a constant reminder of justice in motion. "Sergeant Lucas," she said, her voice still weak but imbued with new strength, "I want you to know that I feel no joy in what is happening to my daughter, only immense sadness. But I also know that what she did cannot go unpunished. No one deserves to go through what I went through." Mendez nodded, his gaze respectful. "Donna Elsa, you are a woman of admirable strength. Justice is not about revenge, but about restoring order, about ensuring that acts like this do not recur. Your courage is fundamental to that." Lucas squeezed the elderly woman's hand. "You are an inspiration, Donna Elsa. And the bull, well, he is too. He is proof that life always finds a way to fight." The mention of the bull brought a faint smile to Donna Elsa's lips. "Ah, Valente," she murmured, "he was always a special animal. Who would have thought he'd be my guardian angel?" The image of the bull, strong and protective, contrasted brutally with the image of her daughter, now fragile and helpless at the police station. Back at the police station, the daughter was informed that she would be transferred to a provisional detention cell. Dr. Almeida tried to argue for house arrest, citing her medical condition, but the prosecutor was adamant. The gravity of the charges and the risk of flight were too high. "Miss, your bail will be denied, at least for now," Dr. Almeida informed her, his voice heavy with regret. "They will consider you a flight risk. Prepare to be transferred to the women's penitentiary. It's standard procedure for high-severity cases." Her world collapsed completely. Penitentiary. That word echoed in her mind. Cold and inescapable, she who had always lived in luxury, who despised poverty and vulgarity, would be thrown into an environment that represented everything she hated most. The irony was a poison even more potent than the one she had administered to her mother. As she was wheeled out of the interrogation room in her wheelchair, the few police station staff watched her with looks of curiosity and revulsion. The whispers, previously inaudible, now seemed like screams in her mind. The daughter who tried to kill her mother. The one with the bull. Her reputation, her image, everything was irremediably destroyed. The detention cell was small, cold, and smelled of disinfectant and despair. The iron bars, the concrete bed with a thin mattress, the stainless steel toilet. Every detail was a blow to her old life. She, who had dreamed of the inheritance to expand her luxury empire, was now trapped in a cage, without jewels, without designer clothes, without a mirror to admire her own image. She curled up on the bed, her leg in a cast, stretched out, feeling the cold of the concrete penetrate her bones. The approaching night would be long and full of ghosts. The ghost of her unbridled ambition, the ghost of the mother she tried to murder, and the ghost of the bull, the unexpected guardian of justice, who had sealed her fate with a precise headbutt. The inheritance which she so coveted was now just a distant mirage, replaced by the harsh reality of a cell. The luxury, the power, the freedom, everything had been exchanged for bars and the crushing weight of guilt. Justice, which she thought she could outsmart, was just beginning to show its true face, and the bull, Valente the bull, would forever be the symbol of her downfall. The chapter of the inheritance was closed, and that of punishment was just beginning. The heavy metal door closed, not with a thud, but with a final clang that seemed to seal not just the cell, but her entire future. In that cramped space, where the air was thick with the smell of disinfectant and the echo of broken lives, she curled up. The concrete bed, cold and relentless, offered a rest that was more like torture. Her leg in a cast throbbed, a physical pain added to the mental agony, but which, in some way, was almost a relief, a focal point, amidst the whirlwind of despair. The luxury, the silk, the comfort of a feather mattress, all of it was now a distant memory, as unreal as a dream fading at dawn. The darkness of the cell was a mirror of the darkness that had settled in her soul. The bare walls, scratched with anonymous stories of other women who had been there, seemed to whisper condemnations. She, who had always seen herself as the architect of her own destiny, the mistress of her opulent universe, was now just another shadow, stripped of everything. The jewels, the designer clothes, the impeccable makeup that built her persona. Nothing remained. The image that the cell's mirror, a small piece of polished metal reflected, was that of a pale woman with swollen eyes and a face marked by defeat. The mask had fallen, and what remained was a raw, terrifying vulnerability. The silence of the night in detention was punctuated by strange sounds. The clang of bars, somewhere distant, the muffled cry of another inmate, the incessant drip of a faucet. Each sound was a nail in her coffin of illusions. She tried to close her eyes, but the images refused to disappear. The syringe, the venom, her mother's face contorted in pain, and then the bull. Ah, the bull. Valente, the name she had despised, the animal she considered mere livestock, was now the giant in her nightmares. His imposing figure, his dark, deep eyes, the precise headbutt that had shattered her car and, with it, her life. He was not just an animal. He was the personification of wild justice, the herald of her ruin. The irony was cruel, the punishment poetic, while the daughter drowned in her own private hell. In a hospital room bathed in the soft morning light, Donna Elsa watched the world reborn. The pain was still there, a constant reminder of the cruelty she had faced, but now it was a manageable pain, a pain she could confront. Her mind, previously clouded by pain and venom, was now sharp, clearer than ever. She had survived, not just physically, but spiritually. Sergeant Mendes and police officer Lucas were once again by her side, their presences an anchor in the storm. "Donna Elsa," Mendes began, his voice soft, "the prosecutor is satisfied with the progress of the case. The evidence is irrefutable. The truck driver's testimony, the forensic reports of the venom and syringe, and of course what happened to your daughter's car. Everything fits." Donna Elsa nodded, a faint smile on her lips. "And Valente, how is my bull?" Lucas smiled. "He's fine, Donna Elsa. A hero indeed. The farm staff are treating him like a king. I think he knows he did the right thing." "He was always a good-hearted animal," Donna Elsa murmured, her voice choked with emotion. "Who would have thought that loyalty would come from where it was least expected, and betrayal from where it was most loved?" She paused, her gaze fixed on the window. "I don't want revenge, Sergeant, but I want justice. I want her to understand the gravity of what she did, that one cannot toy with anyone's life, much less one's own mother's." Mendez nodded, understanding the depth of her words. "Justice, Donna Elsa, is in motion, and it will be relentless." Back in the cell, the daughter felt the first ray of sun invade the small space through the high grate. It was not the sun she knew, the one that kissed her skin on paradisiacal beaches or illuminated her luxurious gardens. It was a cold, impersonal sun that only revealed the dust and rawness of the environment. Breakfast, a metal tray with dry bread and an insipid liquid, was an insult to her old routine of sophisticated brunches. She tried to eat, but the knot in her throat was too big. The reality of her new life imposed itself with every passing minute. Dr. Almeida had been clear: bail denied, imminent transfer to the women's penitentiary. The word penitentiary echoed in her mind like a death knell. She, who had avoided any contact with vulgarity, would be thrown into a cauldron of despair and criminality. The inheritance, the empire she had dreamed of building, was now just a distant echo, a ghost of ambition that had led her to ruin. The luxury, the power, the freedom, everything had been exchanged for bars, for a hard mattress, and for the crushing weight of guilt that finally began to settle. Justice, which she thought she could outsmart with her money and cunning, was just beginning to show its true face. And the bull, Valente the bull, the improbable guardian of life, would forever be the symbol of her downfall, the silent and powerful witness to her cruelty. The chapter of the inheritance was closed, and that of punishment was just beginning. The approaching night would be even longer, and the ghosts of her choices more vivid than ever. She curled up on the concrete bed, the rough uniform scratching her sensitive skin. Tears, which had seemed dry before, now welled up, hot and bitter, streaming down her pale face. They were not tears of genuine remorse, but of self-pity, of anger at being caught, at having failed in her perfect plan. The luxury, the power, the freedom, everything had been exchanged for bars, for a hard mattress, and for the crushing weight of guilt that finally began to settle. Justice, which she thought she could outsmart with her money and cunning, was just beginning to show its true face. And the bull, Valente the bull, the improbable guardian of life, would forever be the symbol of her downfall, the silent and powerful witness to her cruelty. The chapter of the inheritance was closed, and that of punishment was just beginning. The approaching night would be even longer, and the ghosts of her choices more vivid than ever. In the oppressive silence of the cell, she heard the echo of a headbutt. It wasn't real, but in her mind the sound resonated, a constant reminder of the animal that, with a single act of brute force, had dismantled her life of lies and ambition. Valente, the bull, the guardian of the pasture, had become the executioner of her fate. And while Donna Elsa, in the hospital, began to glimpse a future of peace and healing, her daughter, in the darkness of the penitentiary, faced a future of isolation and forced reflection. The scales of justice, finally, had balanced, not by human hand, but by the firm hoof of an animal that refused to see life unjustly cut short. The end of an era of luxury and cruelty, and the beginning of a new one, where the loyalty of a bull was worth more than all the fortune in the world.